want to preface this story by saying that I haven't always had the easiest of lives. I was once an addict, and while I've been clean for some years now, this is one of the 3 or 4 close calls that I've had in my prior days while living on the streets. I was hanging outside a Walmart in my city one evening, and it was probably around 10 p.m. Not having much to do or anywhere to go, I was, as usual, just killing time. This guy approached me and we got to talking. He seemed like an okay guy at first, and explained he was just heading inside to boost a few things, and that he knew a guy out in the suburbs that paid top dollar for merch. When you're on the streets, this is a quick way of scoring, trading stolen merchandise for either cash or drugs. So I agreed to wait for him while he went inside. The plan was to hop on rapid transit to go meet this dude and score. He returned about a half an hour later, and we started to head to the subway. And we're chatting about what kind of stuff we both had to trade. I was also kind of looking forward to getting top dollar for my products, as he had explained that this guy was quite generous. Now, in retrospect, I should have caught this play right from the beginning, as I'm quite sharp usually. But being dope sick, I wasn't thinking very straight. All of a sudden, this girl shows up and starts walking beside us. She introduces herself to us and ends up tagging along on the train there. She's talking about Jesus and all the great things that are going on in her life, which also should have stood out. But like I said earlier, I was rather oblivious. We got off at our stop and started walking to the merch dude's house. Now on the way there, it became very evident that these two knew each other. There was a bit of whispering going on, and what originally flagged my intel was when the Jesus talk stopped and the sinister stories of living on the streets, as well as other dark stories, started and persisted the rest of the way. This began to trigger my nervousness. We finally got to the merch guy's house. No lights on, and there was obviously no one home. But the idiot dude kept knocking on the door as if the guy was expecting him. At this point, I knew there was no merch guy, and this was just some random house. We left the property, and I swear to this day the look on both of their faces screamed nothing but darkness. We were walking up a hill, and he was telling me how now that his friend wasn't home, he had a plan B. I looked behind me as we were walking, and there was now another guy following us, about 10 feet behind. And as we crossed the next intersection, a guy traveling towards us from the adjoining sidewalk turned in front of us and was now walking about 10 feet in front of us. Now the guy and the girl are right beside me, myself wedged right between them. And this girl is talking about human trafficking and what happens to people during ransom scams, and really starting to scare me. So yeah, now alarm bells are going off full tilt, and I'm wondering what I did in this life to end up in situations like this. Flying on absolute instinct now, I tell the both of them that I have to tie my shoe and stop walking. I look down, and without looking up, I drive my right foot down into the guy's knee, which hyperextends it and leaves him on the ground in a heap. I look up, punch the girl in the throat, and she hit the deck as well. The two guys in front of me were now a couple feet away coming to grab me. I slipped out to the left and sprinted across the street all the way up to the next intersection. There was a bus coming in the opposite direction, so I turned left and sprinted to catch it where it was pulling over to stop. As I caught up and got on it, I glanced back over my shoulder, and to my surprise, there was no one behind me chasing me. I was completely out of breath, and the bus driver just said, "Calm down there, partner. There will be another bus in about 4 hours when the sun rises. No need to run that fast to catch this one." I gasped the words, "Thank you," and the bus pulled away. In about 5 minutes, I was back at the original subway station we had gotten off at. I caught the last train back downtown and literally cried the whole way. I'm a 39-year-old male, and unfortunately, scenarios like this are extremely common where I live, and most people just aren't that lucky. Most people end up turning tricks or tied to a chair, tortured, and getting money extorted from their families. I'm just glad that I didn't turn out as one of those bleak statistics. This story happened about 3 years ago, and I still have nightmares about it. My mother came to stay with me for a week, which I already knew wasn't going to be fun. We can hardly stand to be in the same room as one another, so fighting is inevitable. On her 5th night here, we got into a heated debate about religion, and it somehow turned into a full-out screaming match. About an hour into the screaming, my apartment manager knocked on the door. Before I could even apologize, my mother jumps in and says that I had been threatening her. I was so shocked and appalled that it threw me into a mini panic attack right there. I grabbed my keys from the key rack and I took off. It wasn't the wisest thing to do, I know, but I was so frazzled that I didn't know what else to do. I ended up sobbing my eyes out and just driving. And this went on and off for about an hour and 70 miles. Driving has always calmed me down, so even after the tears subsided, I just kept going. About another hour later, I saw an exit for a dam, which surprised me. I had lived here for 2 years, and I had no idea there was a dam anywhere close by. I decided to go take a look, even though it was already 3 in the morning and pitch black. I still wasn't ready to head back, and this seemed like a good distraction. It was another 30 miles on a desolate road before I finally reached the dam. It was hard to miss because it was the only light I had seen for those 30 miles. I crossed the dam and saw there were a couple turns leading to campsites. At this point, I also realized that there was a legit lake. I decided to flip around and go back to a little parking area I had seen near the dam. I parked, and my night took a turn for the terrifying. Once there, I proceeded to make one idiotic move after another. I rolled down my windows and could hear the sound of water hitting the shore, but in the light of my headlights, I couldn't see where it was coming from. The mosquitoes were pretty bad, so I rolled my window back up and started fishing around in my back seat for a flashlight that I knew I had somewhere in the car. Then I remembered that I put it in the trunk. Now for what happens next. Please feel free to label me as an idiot, because I surely am. I popped the trunk, turned off my car, opened the door, stepped out, closed the door, got the flashlight, closed the trunk, went back to the door, and it was locked. My doors unlock when you open them, so I have no idea how the door became locked again, but it was. And like the idiot that I am, I still had the key in the ignition. I knew the door should have remained unlocked, so I hadn't really thought about taking the key. Instantly, tears started to well up, because I knew I hadn't even bothered taking my phone with me. I panicked for a while. Then I remembered the campsites I had seen, and I hoped that maybe someone would be in one, and they would have a phone that I could borrow. I started walking, and fretting about waking up some poor stranger in the middle of the night. But I didn't see any other options. Each campsite I came to was completely empty. I think I checked 15 or so before I started to get nervous about how far I was wandering away from my car. I think I had to have walked about a mile or so. On the walk back, my battery started to fade on my flashlight. I was only about halfway back, and my panic reached a whole new level. For whatever reason, the parking area and my car seemed like a safe haven, and I started sprinting. Well, in all my panic, and in the darkness, I got switched around somewhere and ended up in a dead-end campsite, even though I would have sworn that I was still on the main road. This is when the major tears started. I panicked even more and ended up in just another campsite. It felt like I was just getting more and more lost, and I couldn't hear the water anymore. So I calmed myself and decided to stay put till morning, which I knew wasn't too far away at that point. I sat down, wrapped my arms around my legs, and proceeded to try and rock myself into calmness. It worked pretty well until I saw him. I had my eyes closed as I rocked, but then I heard a dull footstep. I looked up, obviously startled, and saw him standing only a few feet away. He was massive, probably about 6'4", with a large but not fat build, looking like a football player or something. In hindsight, it's amazing I hadn't heard him approaching sooner, or smelled him. For a second, all I could do was stare in horror and gasp out incomprehensible words. Then I screamed. It only took him a second to cross the distance between us, but I didn't even have time to properly get up before he had his hand around my throat, choking me. For reference, I'm not particularly big, 5'3", 130 pounds. Not skinny, but not fat either. To him, I was nothing more than a little rag doll. I wasn't even sure what was happening, but I was being jerked around by my neck and arm. His hands were huge, and every place he grasped and pulled felt like he would snap something. When the movement stopped, I was in his lap, with my head pressed against his chin, and one of his legs partially crossed over me. I tried to make a sound, but when I did, his hand would tighten over my throat again. I went still for a few moments, but then I felt his tongue against my throat. He smelled rancid, like beer and something decomposing. I struggled to get free again, but this time he pinched my esophagus between his thumb and forefinger. It was light at first, but then he started increasing the pressure. By the time he was done, I felt like I was going to pass out. I don't want to go into too much detail, because the memory is still hard to revisit. But he went back to licking, groping, and kissing. It was traumatizing, but he never went for anything too intimate. I gave up on trying to scream or get away, but he would still occasionally choke me. I sat there and simply sobbed. Then, possibly even more disturbing, he started to hum and to rock me. I'm not sure why this part bothered me so much, but it did. His voice seemed higher than it should be, and his hum was rather nasally. I just don't know how to describe it. Then, just as his humming was becoming almost frantic sounding, I saw headlights and he stopped. Somewhere in the distance, it looked as if a car was heading our way. He also saw it, and I felt panic well up inside of me, worried that he would drag me off somewhere. But he didn't. He simply let me go, stood up, and walked the opposite way into the trees. Without him supporting me, I fell back slightly and watched him walk off. The sun wasn't fully up, but there was enough light to make out more of him than I had been able to see before. He looked as bad as he smelled. Dirty, saggy jeans, a white hoodie that was so stained that it looked brownish gray, and medium-length brown matted hair. I didn't see his face at all because I had kept my eyes shut for the entire time that he had me. I could hear the car getting closer, and I stood up. About 30 feet away was my flashlight and where I had been sitting, and I realized just how far he had taken me while he pulled me around like a little doll. I could see the car lights through the trees, but then they suddenly took a left, and panic began to set in again. I worried that he would come back if he saw that the car wasn't coming to the campsite. I started to run. I didn't even care about staying on the path or the road, just as long as I could still see the car. I caught myself on a few bushes, scraped myself, falling over a few times, but the pain didn't even register. I was too desperate to care. It felt like forever, and I don't know how long I actually ran, but I eventually ended up close enough to the car that the couple inside noticed me. They stopped, and the guy got out. I remember not even being able to talk for a long while. I was just shrieking at the poor guy. Even before I could tell them what happened, his girlfriend had called the police. Everything after that seems like a blur now. The couple drove to the parking area as told to by the cops, just in case the man was still around. The sheriff's department showed up, took my statement, took me to the nearest station, asked for another statement, checked me for evidence, then called my mother, contacted the fire department to break into my car for me as well. Just as my mom and friend arrived at the station, a sheriff's car pulled up, and in the back seat was the man. I was promptly pulled back inside and asked to make a positive identification. It wasn't like in the movies, though. They literally just brought him up to me and asked, "Is this him?" Now this part still leaves me extremely emotionally confused, but it is what it is. As I looked up at him, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked ashamed, confused, and oddly vulnerable. Then, as his eyes started to tear up, I knew something had to be wrong with him mentally. And in a weird way, I actually felt some sympathy for him. I did confirm that it was him, but afterwards I actually worried enough about him that I asked what would happen. This is where all sympathy flew out the window, though. He was indeed mentally unstable, as I found out, but he was also a convicted offender. Yeah, I actually lucked out with how little had happened to me. Looking back, it seems more like a dream. My mother and friend took me back to my car, and rather than being stuck in a car with my mom, I opted to let her drive my car back, and I rode with my friend. The entire drive back, she kept drilling me for more information, but I couldn't bring myself to even talk about it. I still don't like talking about it, and I refuse to ever go camping again. I'm also extremely paranoid about always having my key on me when I step out of my car. Not a funny kind of paranoid, but literally it's now a compulsion to check to make sure I have my key with me. I usually have to check 3 times just to satisfy myself. As far as the guy goes, he was admitted into a psych hospital, and I hope he remains there. Not just so he can get the help that he needs, but so he never does this to anybody, ever again. So I once lived in a bad neighborhood just outside of the city. At this point, I had been living there for maybe 3 years with no incident. Well, I mean, there were several shootings on my street, but no one shot at me, so no incident, I guess. I'm the kind of person who can't sit still for very long, so I find myself standing or pacing a lot. On this particular night, maybe at about 2 a.m., I was pacing while reading a textbook to prepare for an upcoming test at my university. I stopped pacing for a little and just stood near my front door to read. That's when I heard my doorknob turn. For some reason, though I nearly made a mess on myself, I was able to calmly look down at the deadbolt to double-check that it was locked. And it was. I looked through the peephole to see who was trying to come in, but no one was standing there. Obviously, this was confusing. I'm neither superstitious nor a believer in the supernatural, but I'm also stupid. So my first thought was, is a ghost trying to break into my house? Thankfully, that thought gave way to a more logical thought of, maybe they're going around back. So I quickly moved to the back door to make sure it was locked, and it was as well. But then my front doorknob turned again. I tiptoe ran to the front door. At this point, my heart is pounding. My dog, a big protective teddy bear, is looking at me with major concern in his eyes. I look through the peephole again, but there's still no one there. That's when I hear a small knock on my door. As I'm looking through the peephole, then a small child's voice says, "Let me in." Silence. "Let me in." I'm still looking through the peephole while covering my mouth with my hand to make my breathing quieter. Through the peephole, I see a small, 3-year-oldish girl walking to the edge of my porch and looking out into my bushes. She nods, then says, "Okay," in what I think was supposed to be a whisper. She walks closer to the door again, and I lose sight of her in the peephole. She tries the handle again, knocks, and says, "Please, help me." My uncle is a cop, so I had heard about people using children as a way to get people to open their door before blitz attacking them, so I'm pretty sure that's what's happening at this point. I wasn't quite sure how to handle the situation, though, so I just said, not even into a phone, "Hi, I think someone's trying to break into my house. Yeah, my address is 123 Fake Street. Yeah, I'll stay on the line." Then I saw a shadow emerge from the bushes. Thankfully, they scooped the kid and ran off. There were 2 people out there, plus that kid. I'm not saying that you shouldn't help children when they're in need, but be extra careful who you open your door to at 2 in the morning.